Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Focus on Liberia. My name is Dennis Jai, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. In today's edition, our topic is Restoration, Repair, and Development, Liberia and the Transitional Justice Dialogue. My guest is Dr. Cosmas Emeziem. Doc, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. It's our pleasure to have you. We want to welcome all our viewers from across the globe. This is Focus on Liberia, and we are talking about transitional justice. Just a little background. Between 1989 and 2003, our country, Liberia, was engulfed by a civil war. Some estimate put the death toll at 250,000. State infrastructures collapsed, and 1 million people were displaced in their homes. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was set up for that purpose, having gathered 200,000 statements and examined many scores of witnesses. The commission handed down a final report recommending 98 people prosecuted for violation of international human rights, violations of international humanitarian law, and war crimes committed during the Civil War. Since then, the issue of transitional justice has eluded us because the TRC document is somewhere collecting dust. Our guest, Dr. Cosmas Emeziem, he's the senior editor of the Cornell Policy Review. He earns his LLM, that's the master, and his JSD in international and comparative law from Cornell Law School. His research focuses on exploring truth commissions as frameworks of transitional justice at Cornell Law School. Dr. Emesian also taught courses on the law of international organization and transitional justice at Cornell Law School. Dr. Emesian, again, our pleasure having you.
Thank you so much, and I'm happy to be here to participate in the dialogue of democracy and the dialogue of transitional justice for the great people of Liberia. And I do believe that such national dialogues are very important in fashioning pathways to meaningful transitional justice. And I'm happy to participate in finding a meaningful pathway, a responsible pathway, a sustainable pathway to that transitional justice process, which the Liberian people, the great people of Liberia, are considering and thinking about and dialoguing about in this moment.
Thank you, Doc. And in case you were wondering, Dr. Cosmas Emeziem is from Imo State in Nigeria, and I told him I'm from Ogun State. If you remember, during the Liberian Civil War, Oru was in Ogun State, and so I claim that as my state, and I claim Jebu-Ode as my city. That I traveled from Ogun State to Imo State. I was trying to get to school there, and then around Ikiti as well. When was the last time you were in Nigeria?
It's been quite a couple of years.
Oh, okay.
I have been on study leave here in the United States for some time. So I've been a little bit away from Nigeria.
All right. Ekaro.
Ekuche.
Ekubadu.
Dadania.
Thank you. That's my little Nigerian there. I want to kind of boast about my my Yoruba experience. Let's get to it. Our topic today, we talk about restoration, repair, and development in the face of the transitional justice dialogue. What is transitional justice? Let's start from there.
So thank you, Dennis. And I would say that there are several conceptual definitions of transitional justice. But one general view about transitional justice is that it is a set of judicial and non-judicial measures which states or countries implement, especially so in post-conflict situations, as a way of accountability, accounting for violations of human rights, violations of socioeconomic rights, and other forms of crimes committed during the war. It could be a civil war, it could be just other crises, and the society decides to implement this set of measures as a way of finding reconciliation, restoration, renewal, and rebuilding of community cohesion so that the community can move on again as one united and a society that respects fundamental human rights. And there are a number of pathways towards transitional justice. That is to say, it could be a truth commission, it
Okay.
could be a criminal tribunal, that like we saw in the Rwandan criminal tribunal in Arusha, Tanzania, like we saw in the Sierra Leonean tribunal backed by the United Nations. It could also be a truth commission, like we saw in South Africa, in post-apartheid South Africa. It could also be a combination of other programs like amnesty, um, forgiveness processes, apology processes. All this, when you put them together, call form the core of what we call transitional justice. So I would say that transitional justice, in a sense, looks like a set of tools with which societies that have emerged from violence, like
Mm.
the Liberian civil war situation, come together to decide how do we move forward. And there are pathways which they can adopt. They can adopt whether a truth commission, a trial proceeding, an apology proceeding, a memorialization process, or such other processes. And these processes can exist together or can be executed one after the other. So, but
Well,
it is for the society to so decide. And that would be my definition of what is called transitional justice.
and you preempted my question because I was going to ask who actually constitute or who formulate, who set up this transitional justice? Because when war is over or about to be over, everything is in chaos. How do people really come together to organize, or is it normally done by an external group?
I would say that the best approach to transitional justice processes is a homegrown approach. And most of the time, it begins with maybe a peace accord, like we had the Ghana Peace Accord,
Yeah.
which ended the civil war in Liberia. It's possible to include a clause in such peace accord that there must be accountability or there must be a transitional justice process. So such peace accords can begin the process of reconciliation or transitional justice generally. That's one way. If it's not included, there's also still an obligation on, say, Liberia as a country that has assumed obligations to respect fundamental rights, to avoid a violation of international criminal laws, to avoid commission of crimes against humanity, to still make for accountability. That is to say, those who died, how did they die? Those who disappeared, how did they disappear? Infrastructures that were affected, what can be done about them? This is like having making an effort to repair the damage that has been caused through the war. So it is the society, like in this case, Liberia, that should decide that they want a transitional justice process. It is not something from outside. The community must decide they want to implement a transitional justice. And so, what do you do to ensure that the community can come up with a decision to implement a transitional justice process? One, you would have to create some level of dialogue like we are having now,
Yeah.
which educates the public as to the need for a transitional justice process. Because every member of the community, every member of the society, every facet of the society, whether tribal groups or political groups or interest groups, civil society organizations, professional bodies, have a role to play in having a successful transitional justice process. In some places, civil society organizations have played a crucial role in formulating the original foundational ideas that led to the establishment of transitional justice process.
And Dr. Emeziem, the
Yes,
word transitional justice, I mean, I'm looking at transitional, meaning we are transitioning from war to peace. Is that why they call it transitional justice?
they call it transitional justice because we are dealing with a society in flux, rapid flux or rapid changes because of the war situation. We
Okay.
are dealing with an uncommon situation. It's not like justice in the normal court process whereby you go to court and wait, wherever it happens. But this is a peculiar process,
Okay.
special process in a society that is rapidly changing or rapidly evolving or emerging from a conflict situation. That's why it's called transition.
Yeah.
It is in a period of change, in a period of transition, in a period of remarkable uh, shifts, paradigm shifts in the structures of the community. We saw the war and the devastating impact it had on the community. It destroyed social amenities, it violated fundamental rights. It destroyed the economy. It also destroyed some of the institutions in that it created distrust in the institutions. And so to repair all this is what the transitional justice effort tries to do. And the transitional justice mechanism allows for flexibility, allows for approaches that would not have been possible in a normal court system.
Yeah.
And sometimes, while we prefer transitional justice in such situations, is because there may not have been a court. Maybe the courts have been destroyed. Maybe the judges or the courts were also compromised in the time of the war. Maybe there's no trust again in parliament. And that's why we have to devise a transitional justice
Okay.
process different from this status quo to create a new dynamic, to create a new paradigm upon which the society can now be set up or as once again as a holistic society, as a society in union with each other, and then move forward for transformative democracy, respect for human rights, and also provision of socioeconomic amenities as are barely needed in those communities in post-conflict situations. And that's why we say transitional justice. Yes.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm getting feedback again. Okay. All right. Hold on. Let me see if I can control this. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are just joining us, this is Focus on Liberia. Our guest, Dr. Cosmas Emeziem. We are speaking the topic restoration, repair, and development, Liberia and the transitional justice dialogue. As you mentioned, there are many ways, in order to have transitional justice. Some prefer the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or Truth Commission, so to speak. In
Yes.
Liberia, that's what we call for as a result of our comprehensive peace agreement in Ghana.
Yes.
So let's start with that. So since that's what we Liberians opted for, has a compromise because the warring faction wanted amnesty, and then we have the civil society calling for war crime for people to be prosecuted. So we
Yes.
have a Truth TRC has a compromise. What's the history of Truth Commission and war crimes court, especially in Liberia, in Africa?
So, truth commissions generally, the earliest attempts on record, began even from Uganda in the post Obote era, but it didn't go deep enough. But in the modern times, the deepening of the elements, or will I say, the fundamental ideas about truth commissions emerged more from the South American region, in Argentina, particularly in the post-military era in Argentina from 1978. Efforts were made to interrogate what happened during the military era, hold people accountable, find out what happened to those who were killed during the military juntas. And then the South African moment came about in the 1990s. Um, you know, the charismatic personality of Dr. Nelson Mandela, may so rest in peace, and that of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, coupled with civil society agitations and interest groups who felt that there's a need to interrogate the past of the South African nation as a way of building a bridge to the future. That's where will I say, the popularization of the idea of Truth and Reconciliation Commission within the African continent boomerang. So it had a boomerang effect. It had a popularization effect within the continent. And today, most of the time, the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission remains a reference point for other regions within the globe, but also very much important in Africa because it has peculiar aspects of the African ideology of reconciliation, of forgiveness, peace. The idea of Ubuntu played a significant role in the formulation of the policies of the Truth Commission, in the implementation of the Truth Commission, and also the continued effort to implement the report of the Truth Commission. So generally, the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission is considered very impressive in terms of its contributions to the development of the idea of truth commissions.
So, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the South African TRC, but there's a Truth Commission or Truth and Reconciliation Commission also comprises War Crimes Court. Can the two be together?
A Truth Commission, by its conception, does not intend to be a criminal trial or a war crimes trial forum. It's not a war crimes trial forum. It could make references, it could make referrals, it could make recommendations that certain persons who may have committed war crimes or crimes against humanity or even genocide should be prosecuted. And that's where the difference lies between truth commissions in themselves and the criminal tribunals on the other hand. In the Sierra Leonean experience, there was an attempt to have a truth commission and a tribunal side by side at the same time, backed by the United Nations. Many scholars believe that the outcome of that experiment is not very fantastic because it created some kind of chilling effect on those who would have come forward to the tribunal, to the Truth Commission to give information about what happened. And that the trial also did not go deep down. It focused on very few persons. And the two are different, but they are both instruments of transitional justice. So truth commissions and tribunals don't exist together per se. But the reports of a truth commission can enable further investigation and further trial of certain persons who may have been perceived to have committed crimes against humanity. Because by law, by international law, no state has the power to forgive or to give amnesty over genocide or a war crime or a crime against humanity, because these class of crimes are considered of a higher value. But what happens is that there are options possible for either the state in issue to prosecute or to ask the ICC to prosecute if the state is a member of the International Criminal Court, or, so there are two pathways there. Either you prosecute or you allow international tribunals to prosecute. And that's what they call the doctrine of complementarity. But there's a caveat. Okay. There's a caveat. Most states are often very careful about implementing a trial proceeding. There are some reasons for that. One, the cost of the trial. Because nobody wants to go to jail, and these persons often being alleged to have committed war crimes, crimes against humanity, or even genocide, are usually top-ranking members of the society. They may still be very influential within that society, so they would defend themselves to the hilt. And so the potential possibility of reversal to a crisis situation kind of sometimes discourages states from prosecuting. Two, timing and information evidence, because criminal trials have to depend on evidence. And if you are from the common law tradition, like, or the Anglo-American tradition, like they call it, which Liberia fits into. What it means is that the criminal trial would also be beyond reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
And so, gathering evidence, which has maybe disappeared over time, becomes also difficult. And so, the level of evidence you need to convict might not exist. Three, witnesses. Witnesses. Uh, in communities like that, witnesses know themselves. The victims know the people who violated them. The communities know the people who committed these crimes, but sometimes they find it difficult to come forward to testify because there are political implications, there are security implications, there
Yeah.
are other implications which they are afraid of, which they cannot speak of in public. And so that's what happened. We found that to have happened in Arusha, Tanzania, over the Rwandan Genocide Tribunal. Some people couldn't come forward to testify. We saw that also in the Kenyan crisis when the Kenyan president and the vice were, charged, alleged to have committed some crimes over the election crisis they had in Kenya.
Yeah.
Nobody, it was difficult to find people to go to the Hague to testify before the ICC. And so many of those cases were withdrawn for want of evidence. And so, the society must interrogate these issues. The country must interrogate these issues before it can say, this is what we want to do, and this is how we want to go about it. And so it's an open
Yeah.
dialogue which the country must have and make a decision one way or the other.
And if a country opt for transitional, or like in the case of Liberia, the TRC, and then that's what we agree on, can a foreign country then prosecute, who people allegedly who took part in the Liberian Civil War and committed crimes against humanity? Because these are our people. We agree that we're not going to persecute them. We're going to forgive them, let them apologize, and so on and so forth. Can any foreign country now have that power while they are away to arrest them and jail them and charge them for crimes against humanity?
Um, like I said, crimes against humanity, genocide, are serious crimes. Genocide, for instance, is considered a peremptory norm. The law which forbids genocide considers it a peremptory norm. So no person can rely on their national laws to escape liabilities
Yeah.
arising from committing genocide. And states, by that law, have powers to arrest such a person and prosecute if the state of origin cannot prosecute, or has no capability to prosecute, or has no political will to prosecute. You see? So that's why it is said that you cannot grant amnesty over genocide.
Right.
That's an example I'm using. You
Mm.
cannot grant amnesty over genocide. And other states have a duty incumbent on them to arrest and prosecute if they find the person. But like I said, these are issues which the state has to consider, and each case has to be specifically interrogated to find out whether
That's
it meets the standard of genocide, whether it meets the standard of crimes against humanity, or whether it meets any other standard for criminal prosecution anywhere in the world. But in principle, no person can rely on the laws of his country to escape liability for an international crime, particularly genocide and crimes against humanity.
two words we often, or two phrases we often hear in the Liberian Civil War, after the Liberian Civil War, especially the TRC, as restorative justice and retributive justice. So sometimes they try to confuse us. What are those two words? What's the difference?
So, uh, in criminal jurisprudence, in criminal law, uh, retributive justice emphasizes punishment. It deals with crime and punishment. Once you see the crime, the next thing you should be looking at is what is the punishment for the crime. Restorative justice, in a layman's parlance, I'm trying to explain these things for the layman,
Right.
for the lay person in society to understand that the difference between restorative justice or retributive justice is a singular emphasis placed on punishment in retribution as opposed to repair or reformation or renewal or redemption as we want in restorative justice. So restorative justice comes with a basket of tools: the tool of reform, the tool of repair, the tool of redemption, believing that this person can actually atone, make reparations to the society, help the society to heal, do some other activities instead of just getting punished. It could be a question of, okay, providing compensation for the victims of those crimes. And that's what they call reparations. And that's an aspect of restorative justice. It could be a question of saying, serve a term of years, or do community service for a term of years for the acts you committed during this time. And that way, you pay back to the society. The individual pays back to the society for the offense committed. These are all believing in the fact that this person can change. This person can be a better contributing member of the society. And so punishment shouldn't be the only tool.
Mm.
And for many scholars, for many practitioners in the field, they do think that restorative justice is more productive in post-conflict situations because it doesn't just look at the crime and punishment, it looks at the socioeconomic circumstances, it looks at the other issues of reform and repair in the society that will make for reconciliation, create a new equilibrium within the community, create harmony within the community, and also create sustainable peace. Because if you just prosecute, for instance, if you just insist on prosecution, you might end up prosecuting people, but you might lose the peace.
Yeah. Let me give you an example. In the Liberian case, 50 persons were barred from taking part from seeking public office for 30 years.
Yes.
Is that retributive or restorative?
It could be interpreted in a sense that Liberia has taken an initiative to give them, that's what they call, it's also a form of, it's a form of transitional justice measure, whereby you insist that those who were tainted or who participated or who in any way were suspected to have been part of all this should stay away from public office. I would say it is both restorative and retributive because it hasn't allowed them to incur the fullest punishment possible for the alleged offenses. And they have not been put on criminal trial, but they have suffered some kind of payment, some kind of punishment because they have been suspended, from participating in public life. So it's also an approach of transitional justice. I wouldn't know how it is implemented in Liberia. I don't know the full details, but I do.
It wasn't. It was just a recommendation.
In Eastern Europe, those who participated as, say, members of the KGB or members of the security forces during the era of Soviet domination, many of them were asked to stay away from public life, in perpetuity, till the end of their life or for a number of years, depending on the level of offense alleged to have been committed.
The TRC still, because as I talk like this, the TRC again, still going back to retributive and restorative, because these two words have been everywhere in our TRC process. The TRC was mandated in Article 4 of the Act, requires the Commission to conduct a critical review of Liberia's historical past with the view to establishing and giving recognition to historical truth in order to address falsehood and misconceptions of the past relating to national socio-economic and political development. It also was established to provide a forum that will address the issue of impunity and the opportunity and provide that space and opportunity for both the victims and the perpetrators to share their experience in order to get a clear picture of what happened so we can all forge ahead for true healing and reconciliation. My question is there anything in the TRC of Liberia that give it either power for restorative or retributive justice? Sorry, did I come again?
Thank you. TRCs are not the government. TRCs are ad hoc, most of the time, ad hoc bodies, ad hoc organizations set up, ad hoc commissions set up for the purpose, for the moment, to conduct this inquiry and make a report. In that report, make some recommendations. The larger work of reform, the larger work of implementation of reports of TRCs belongs to the people. So the powers often given to TRCs is powers of recommendation. And I didn't see anywhere in the terms of reference of the TRC Commission in Liberia, which empowers it to go ahead and prosecute.
Recommend prosecution, recommend or punishment or restorative justice.
Yes, based on what they have found, they have powers to make recommendations.
Okay.
That power exists in the terms of reference, as you even read it out.
Right.
It's a way of saying this is the only way we can move forward. Even in the South African situation, recommendations were made, many of which have not been implemented today, some of which have been implemented. And so what we do, what the terms of reference does, is to set out a structure upon which recommendations can be made as to how the country can move forward. If the TRC made some recommendations as for punishment, as for prosecution, or any other form of retributive action, it is the duty of the state, the country as a whole, to decide how to move forward on that. And there are many approaches to that. It doesn't just have to be a question of punishment. Punishment can be of several forms. It can be of several forms. Like I did mention that in the old Eastern Europe, when those reforms happened in the 1990s too, there were recommendations that certain persons should no longer participate in public life, but they were not sent to jail. So those are like different methodologies, different approaches to achieve the same goal of highlighting that we as a community, we reject these actions that took place. We reject the participation of these people in these processes that created harm to other citizens. And these are some of the issues that often emerge in truth commissions. Yes, it might look it might create tensions, but truth commissions often have powers to make recommendations, whether as to certain persons who can be prosecuted or otherwise.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are just joining us, this is Focus on Liberia. We are discussing transitional justice. In the case of Liberia, we're saying repair, restoration, and development, the Liberian Transitional Justice Dialogue. My guest, Dr. Cosmas Emeziem, is joining us here to talk about this. Now, I have two questions. The first one, because I want us to go back to the South African example and what we Liberians can learn from it. But before that, can the issue of transitional justice, improvement in security and peace go hand in hand? And I'm asking this because, like in the case of Liberia, we have the war laws, and people who participated or have the greatest responsibility in the greatest responsibility in the war have power. They have money. They have influence. So can we really seek this transitional justice route and still have peace and security? Because at the end of the war, we tried to put the yearning for peace was so much overbearing, and security of the people then holding people accountable. So what I'm asking now, transitional justice, holding people accountable, peace, security, can they all go hand in hand?
So, in a way, transitional justice is also a path to peace.
Okay.
This debate has been had so much in the scholarly papers, in scholarly publications. It is not either peace or justice without peace. Justice is a pathway to peace. In fact, lasting peace cannot be achieved without justice. So to have sustainable peace, you need to have justice. But the question to ask is the timing, the capacity, the persons who can implement a transitional justice process. Do they exist? Is Liberia ready to really carry out a thoroughgoing transitional justice process, implementing the full gamut of recommendations made by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? That is the question the country have to answer for itself. It has to answer that question, whether it is ready, whether it is ripe, whether it has the resources in human and capital resources to invest in a transformative transitional justice process that will also include prosecutions as recommended by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Liberia. So time is of the essence in transitional justice processes. Yes, these warlords might be powerful, but you know, sometimes too they lose power with time. With time, the society also generates capacity to checkmate them. In time too, society also evolves, and maybe they too understand that they made a mistake or they didn't serve the country, they served the country poorly, and they might as well be open to national dialogues as to how to find a pathway to peace, which is the path of justice. Justice does not exist in a vacuum. It is for the society as a whole. And peace means nothing if it is not founded on justice, because that would be the peace, like they say, the peace of the graveyard, whereby there are bones littered all over the place, yet you are claiming that there is peace. Because war creates what they call intergenerational trauma. People can still remember what happened. People can still remember who violated their rights. People can still see those persons maybe as their neighbors. So there is a need to create an opportunity for closure, particularly for those people who suffered violence. And it's not justified to say, oh, we might have crisis, and so we have to throw away justice.
And
Justice,
that's the catch 2020.
yes.
What do
So
we do?
you need continuous dialogue. You need continuous education. You need continuous engagement with the relevant stakeholders in society so that people can understand the need that both of them are not mutually exclusive. They can exist together. Peace and justice can exist together. And it has to be carefully thought through, considering the capacities of the state, considering the political situations on the ground, considering the time for implementation. And if these are carefully thought through, you can be able to come forward with a strategic plan for implementing a transitional justice process. And I would recommend that this is not something that societies jump into. They dialogue intensively at different levels, at community levels, at tribal levels, at government levels, at institutional levels, before they can decide to really go forward. And that's when it really matters. And that's when it can really be hopeful that it will be successful. Otherwise, you might step in without getting fully prepared, and that can create a lot of problems.
And as you said that, I'm wondering in the case of Liberia, it's like, okay, who starts this? Who provides the leadership in this continuing dialogue? Where do we start from, in your opinion?
So I would say that to one of the ways is that um, a lot of it, part of it, will be from the government. No meaningful transitional justice can take place without the buy-in, without the interest of the government, without the government believing in it and pursuing it. Because the government has the entire levels of power within the state. It has the power to provide security, it has the power to provide funding, it has the power to provide diplomatic support for any transitional justice process to be effectual and effective. That's one. It could also start from civil society organizations. And I do know that civil society organizations can make a proposal in parliament, but they have to be able to put themselves together, articulate a proposal together, and come to present it in parliament. And it begins first with public education by the civil society organizations that this is what we have, this is our proposal, we are taking it to parliament. And that's also a way of increasing the dialogue for transitional justice to happen. So those are like two approaches that can be adopted from the civil society, from professional institutions, professional organizations like journalists, lawyers, other facets of the society that can influence public opinion, influence public education in such a way that there will be a groundswell of public interest to implement a transitional justice. That can also enhance or push or put some meaningful pressure on government to recognize that the people want transitional justice. But again, you have to also understand that sometimes some of the people who might be affected by transitional justice may also be in government. So the pressure might be much more on the civil society to, increase the increase pressure on government to realize that the transitional justice is necessary for the country to really embrace a transformative pathway that will enhance peace, enhance justice, enhance harmony, and also enhance development, because you cannot have meaningful development unless you can guarantee some level of peace and justice. And one of the arms of justice is socioeconomic justice:
Mm.
access to water, access to food, access to public amenities that can enhance their quality of life. And if you look at Liberia with low human development index, you find that part of the issues that are causing fragility, or will I say, um, some dissonance within the polity, are issues of socioeconomic
Economic.
rights,
Yeah.
and those are very important if we have to go forward in implementing a transitional justice process. So,
Thank
government
you.
and civil society have a role to play.
Great. Our topic again: restoration, repair, and development, Liberia and the Transitional Justice Dialogue. If you want to participate in the conversation, please call 605-313-6004. The code is 791403. Having discussed that, the South African TRC has been a model. And I told you, I was coming back to it, right? What
Yes.
can we learn from it? Tell us a little bit about that and what can Liberia learn from it, because we keep making reference to it and some of us we don't really fully know what it all about. So tell me about it and what exactly can we learn and apply to the Liberian situation.
So, thank you. Yes, within the continent, the South African Truth Commission is considered to be a model. It's also very peculiar to the experience of South Africa as a post-apartheid state. Certain factors played critical role, like I keep emphasizing on social movement, on public engagement by civil society organizations. It was very significant in shaping the dialogue that subsequently led to the negotiations that led to the handover of government from the apartheid regime to a democratic South Africa led by Nelson Mandela. So the personality of Nelson Mandela and other leaders of ANC, the other leaders of other political parties within the country, led to a peaceful transition, even though there were pockets of violence. even though certain black leaders were also killed even before the elections were over. But there was a reasonable transition which was not imagined 10 years before. So it happened, and that dramatic moment was also seized both by the civil society and the leaders of the country at the time to set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. They had a number of deliberations and then chose particularly persons they considered of high moral integrity, high public integrity, to handle the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Many scholars, many practitioners believe that the personality of uh, Archbishop Desmond Tutu played a key role in the successful implementation, successful execution of the Truth and Reconciliation process. The Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa also involved public hearings, and those public hearings were like a moment for recounting, a moment of liberation for many of those who came forward to give account. There were also some kind of bargain. Some people were forgiven or given amnesty from, pardon for the evidence they will volunteer. And that helped a lot in bringing out a lot of information about some of the people that were killed. For instance, one of the ANC leaders, one of the black leaders at the time, who died in police custody, Steve Biko.
Yeah.
It was only during the Truth Commission that people found out exactly how he died. And for his family, he provided some level of closure, even though they were not exactly satisfied. He provided some closure that this was how their, their brother, their father, their husband died in the hands of the government. So the lessons learned are many. Integrity was key to the execution of the Truth Commission in South Africa. Forbearance, the ability of people to look at things and say, we forgive, was also important because it created an opportunity for a lot of reconciliatory efforts. Three, it also recommended and there was also established subsequently a victims compensation fund, part of which was used to ensure that some of those who suffered direct violation from the government of South Africa, the apartheid government as it were at the time, received some level of succor, some level of reparations for the harm they have suffered. It also did establish a very important report, and that report has continued to play a role in the deliberations, political and democratic deliberations that are happening in South Africa today. And in a number of cases before the Truth and before the South African Constitutional Court, they have made reference to the report of the Truth Commission as a foundational ground for some of the decisions they have made. So it introduced also, it made popular the idea of Ubuntu, which is recognizing the humanness of another, recognizing the dignity of every member of the society, not minding race, social class, tribal group, or whatever other considerations. So it made those contributions, and those contributions keep resonating in conversations about truth commissions, whether in Africa or elsewhere. And we think it was quite a great effort, and we can only improve on what South Africa did. But of course, like I said earlier on, it is peculiar to South Africa because they were dealing with institutional violence. Here, we are dealing also with some level of institutional violence, but more of individual human beings who
Right.
played a part in the war situation, who played a part in creating the crisis in the first place, who played a part in violating fundamental rights and fundamental freedoms, and who have not been held accountable, whether by the Liberian state or elsewhere.
Thank you. I like that, the institutional and the individual side of it. Let's get some comments here, and the phone lines are open. You can call to join the conversation. River says pro, I don't know, pro me, professional. He calls you a great guest. And here is a question: which process better bring peace and stability among the victim and the perpetrators? Which process is durable and will bring peace and stability among? I think when we were talking about, is it war crime? Is it TRC? So it's based on that. He's asking the question: which one bring peace? Hold your thought. Let me read a few more comments here. Gplay is watching. Javi Bestman say that's great. And Seattle Townsend said this is an interesting topic. River says again, said, interesting. He said, no state has the right to forgive crimes against humanity. There are biases when it comes to the South African situation and other Black countries. Biases may exist everywhere. Gabriel Williams, a Liberian diplomat, said this is one of the best interviews on FOL, very informative and educational.
Thank you.
Baseman said this is a sober reflection and a reminder to all Liberians. Let's take actions now. Jackie says, thank you, Dr. Emeziem. You have shed light on so much. Political will is very important. Alfonso Mensa, it is a long process, and the process could be overshadowed politically, being that some politicians who are in government were part of the war. How strategically this can be done. Alfonso also said this is one of the best interviews. And then Ahmed Sarif, I think he's talking to me here, he said, you are speaking as if implementing the TRC report is the beginning of the transitional justice approach. The TRC itself was a transitional justice process. Aspect of the report, like the Palava Hut processes, are transitional justice processes. They are both judicial and non-judicial mechanisms that constitute transitional justice. Those are a few of the comments.
Absolutely. I would agree with Ahmed that truth commissions, like I mentioned earlier on, that truth commission is part of the mechanisms implemented as a transitional justice process in societies, especially societies emerging from crisis or conflict situations, which they call post-conflict or post-authoritarian states. And I didn't say that it begins and ends with a truth commission. A truth commission is just only a...
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Focus on Liberia. We are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. Our topic, restoration, repair, and development, Liberia and the Transitional Justice Dialogue. My guest is Dr. Cosmas Emeziem. He is our guest tonight. And you are watching Focus on Liberia. If you want to join the conversation, once again, the number is on the screen, 605-313-6004, 791-403. That's the code if you are in the diaspora or in North America. You'll be able to call that number. And we'll take a short break right now, and we're going to be right back. Welcome back to Focus on Liberia. We are discussing transitional justice. My guest, Dr. Cosmas Emeziem. Doc, welcome back.
Thank you. So I was explaining that truth commissions are part of the transitional justice mechanisms. It is not that transitional justice begins and ends with a truth commission, but it might begin with a truth commission because even after the implementation of a truth commission, the transition hasn't stopped. The transitional justice process has not ended because all they do is to produce a set of recommendations. Those recommendations continue the process of transitional justice. And that is where some other mechanisms like lustration, the idea that people who have participated in those processes in the past should no longer participate in public life. That's what is called lustration. It was used a lot in the former Soviet Union, like that's in Eastern Europe, in places like Czech Republic, after their emergence from the Soviet era. It could also be a reparation process whereby victims are provided with some compensation, with some rehabilitative measures, like providing them with amenities they need to go to school, to learn a work. You know, it could also be some of the processes like demobilization, demilitarization, and disarmament. All these are all transitional justice processes, and they differ from country to country, considering the special needs of that particular country. The transitional justice process in Liberia can't be the same as in South Africa because the peculiarities are different. While South Africa was emerging from a post apartheid society, Liberia had a combination of military rules, military coups, civil wars, and violence. And the civil war came in stages. So it depends on the timeline you want to look at. If you want to look at 1970 to 1989, or 1989 to 1996, or 1996 to 2003, these are all different timelines, and they might require different approaches in the implementation of the already conducted Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. So I agree, and I did not make any representation earlier on that truth commissions are the only processes of transitional justice, or they are outside the larger framework of transitional justice. I also did state that um, what processes bring more reconciliation, what processes bring more peace. I also did say that if you go the route of prosecution, how many people will you prosecute? You will prosecute very few people. Even by your recommendations, the people to be prosecuted are few in number by the Truth Commission's recommendations, which is to say that we also know, the society knows that there's a limit to prosecution. And prosecution does not provide victims compensation. It only provides punishment for the aggressors, for the people who committed the crime. Prosecution does not repair a church, neither does it repair a school or a hospital that was destroyed during the war. Prosecution provides no water and sanitation. So, the larger framework of transforming a post conflict society through the transitional justice process must involve more than just prosecution. And that's why we think that a more sustainable pathway to transitional justice is a combination of these other processes, which might include a truth commission, like you have had, might include a victims compensation, like you have had, which might include even constitutional making, because some of the questions that arose or led to the crisis in Liberia were citizenship questions. And such fundamental issues have to be redefined in an inclusive way. So, having an inclusive, sustainable constitution is actually a transitional justice process because constitutions in Africa are responsible, are used in managing diversity. And for many diverse communities, we are all diverse in all our African communities. For those diversities to thrive for the benefit of the growth and development of the country, they have to be carefully articulated in a constitution that recognizes the humanity, the dignity, the personality, the human rights of every member of that community. It has to be inclusive, it has to be progressive, it has to unlock the capacity of the country to be productive and develop. So sometimes too, questions of land reform are part of transitional justice. In South Africa, they are still talking about how to reform the land system, the land ownership system in South Africa. And that was part of the things recommended by the Truth Commission. And because a Truth Commission is ad hoc, it doesn't last forever. It has a timeline. Those things can only be handled as recommendations by the government in the future, by the society in the future. So that's why we think that a more sustainable pathway to transitional justice is the pathway that combines truth commissions with other reforms like constitutional making, like provision of social amenities, like reconciliation, like memorialization. In Rwanda, you have a genocide memorial. I don't know whether Liberia is thinking of something like that, a war memorial that encapsulates the memory of the nation, that encapsulates the memory of the people, the great people of Liberia, and what they went through during the Civil War. And if you understudy other places where that has been done, it's always an opportunity to provide a memory to the future generations so that they can see the cost of war, they can see the cost of civil conflict, so that from learning that lesson, the public memorial provides the education, provides the awareness needed for a better society, a better respect for fundamental freedoms, and a better recognition that war can actually destroy many things that we love.
There are three countries went to war almost around the same time.
Yeah.
Liberia, I think we were holding the records until Rwanda came along and broke that record, and and then Sierra Leone. Those three we saw in Liberia, the TRC. We saw another form of transitional justice in Sierra Leone and also in Rwanda. I want us to look at all three and what can we learn. In my view, Liberia is the only country that did almost nothing.
Um, it would seem to me, that Sierra Leone and Rwanda have also kind of progressed on different pathways, uh, unlike Liberia. I would say that the Liberian situation was too gross, that nobody wanted to just let it be like that, so that the international community did not just see it as a peacekeeping effort, like they saw the Liberian situation, whereby the United Nations peacekeeping effort for Liberia was kept there also to help set up the police force, reform the security institutions, and move on. But no tribunal was set up for Liberia. But in the case of Rwanda, there was a special tribunal for Rwanda set up in Arusha, Tanzania. But it was also seen that that prosecution is not enough. There has to be some level of truth commission. Rwanda itself implemented what they call the Gachacha courts. And that was an attempt to use an African point of view, an African framework, to also create reconciliation and peace within the community, create some level of transitional justice. Rwanda has also proceeded to establish a memorial, like I was saying, showing, highlighting what has happened. I mean, some critics are saying the memorial is also not complete, that it's leaving out some things. But I do think that a foundation has been set up which can be improved in the future. But I also do think that Rwanda has also done tremendously well in bringing some level of socioeconomic development to the country in the recent times. And in fact, many are shocked at the level of development that has happened in Kigali in the past 20 years, as opposed to what we have seen in Sierra Leone and what we have seen in Liberia. So that's why we say leadership and governance are critical to a transformative transitional justice effort. And I am thinking that the leadership capacity and the governance capacity of the present leaders in Rwanda has contributed significantly to the transformative transition they have had. There are still pockets of questions, there are still pockets of annoyance, there are still pockets of bitterness within the society. There are also debates about the style of leadership of president, the president of Rwanda. But these are like normal democratic deliberations. They are no longer at the level of the crisis in 1994 when over 800,000 people were killed in the genocide. Sierra Leone has also struggled, but at least they have held together their democratic ethos, their democratic institutions. It hasn't collapsed once again into a civil war. Um, they seem to have also made further movements in terms of development. But I also do think that the impact of the establishment of the United Nations backed special tribunal for Sierra Leone played a role, and also the disappearance of some of the leaders of the factions that played a role in the wars in Sierra Leone. Uh, we can remember their names, but I don't want to call names. But I do remember that a number of them have either died or they are in jail somewhere abroad. So I do think that also created an enabling environment for some kind of new set of leadership to emerge and help the society reform. I know some of the players in the Sierra Leonean crisis or the Sierra Leonean struggle are still within the system, but it's not as significant, I would say, I would argue, as the situation in Liberia, because there's not been any kind of serious uh, serious impact on those who participated in the process. And I would think maybe that's what is creating um, a frigid situation in Liberia, which has not allowed it to unlock its potentials. But I do believe that Liberia has as much energy as Sierra Leone, as much energy as Rwanda to transform itself. But there has to be the political will to do so. There has to be the public education that this is important. There has to be the acceptance by the public that justice can be accomplished together with development and peace. That none of these three elements, justice, peace, and development, are mutually exclusive. It's not like if you do justice, you miss development, or if you do
Right.
development, you miss uh, peace. So those three can be worked out, and they have to be worked out by the people, and the people have to decide that this is what they want. Nobody can impose a transitional justice on a country because it will fail. And that's where I will leave it.
Thank you, and I
Thank you,
like
and
how
I like how you are.
you've been very diplomatic on the subject. I appreciate that so well. But two things I picked up, right? That the reason Liberia is where it is today is one, war crimes court or some form of tribunal, and leadership. Do you Can you elaborate a little more on that? Because it's evident that the lack of punishment for the perpetrators, putting them away or some form of punishment, and then the leadership to create that space where we can have the dialogue that will lead to transitional justice is lacking in Liberia, and that's just what it is.
Like I said, I think governance, leadership is critical to any effort, is crucial to any effort at transitional justice. If the leaders of the country don't believe that there should be a transitional justice, you would need to convince them. You will need to pressure them. So pressure groups, civil society organizations have a big role to play in convincing, in educating the leaders, in making them realize that it's not an attempt to pull them down, but it's an attempt to reconcile the community and help the community to develop. So leadership is important. You can't give that away because the leaders of the country are the diplomatic representatives of the country anywhere in the world.
Right.
So it is what they suggest, it's what they allow that would happen. You can't ride roughshod on on that leadership and say you want to implement a transitional justice. It will not go far. So that's why I'm saying there's a need for a groundswell of interest, a groundswell of public education that will encourage people to participate, to see the reasons why there should be a transitional justice.
Thank you. We have a caller on the line.
Yes, please.
Caller, your name and where you calling from?
Thank you. My name is Emesian. I'm calling from Minnesota, and I want to thank Dr. Emeziem, if I'm pronouncing the name properly.
Yes,
I
please.
think that you have laid the foundation of transitional justice and really talking to what's out there in the literature and what's been practiced. Particularly, I appreciated when you mentioned that every conflict has its own context and history. And so one transitional justice measure in one country doesn't translate to another automatically because every conflict is unique. Even as in Liberia, you lay out timelines are also very unique. So you might have to look at different measures. But what I wanted to comment about really is this thing in Liberia about war and economic crime or the implementation or lack thereof of the TLC report. I think that our society misunderstands because, like you're saying, there hasn't been any groundswell of education around what transitional justice really means. What are the measures? What are the appropriate mechanisms that suit our situation? For instance, a war crimes or economic crimes court may even be good for an alleged perpetrator or a former warlord. Uh, it may be good for the society in general because we need some type of shock therapy, for instance, because people are traumatized. None of that has been addressed. And I also appreciated your comment about demoralization and doing really things that will make us not to forget, to remember, and then also educate us and bring us to where we need to be able to meet people's needs and move the country forward through different transitional justice mechanisms. Because transitional justice, as you said, is just a blanket word that has both judicial and non-judicial mechanisms that have
Yes.
all kinds of sub measures, some of which is laid out. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you for your comments. Um, 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 the points you make are very crucial, very critical to understanding the scope of transitional justice. The fact that societies have their own contextual realities, which have to be reflected in a transitional justice. And that's why I say there has to be a public education, a public commitment, which will now enable people to understand that this particular framework fits our society or does not fit our society. We need to adapt it. So the adaptation will be based on the peculiar needs of that community. And what I see in Liberia is that the dialogue has to get down to the grassroots, has to get down to the institutions, has to get down to the parliament, to the judiciary, to every facet of the community, so that there can be some kind of reawakening that we need to have a closure to what has happened. We began well with a truth and reconciliation commission, but that journey has not ended. That journey has not got to its logical conclusion. And one way of doing it is to enhance this, to do that, to do the other things. And economic crimes might be also difficult to prosecute because of evidence. But you can also create a structure that leads to transformative economic development and enhance the life of those who were negatively impacted by the economic crimes. And that's what we talk about when we are dealing with reparations. If we are saying repair, provide succor for those who suffered during the time, it's also a way of transforming their economic well-being. And one way of transforming the economic well-being of an average citizen in any country is to empower them with education. How much education are we giving to our people? Until we are able to give them the quality of education which enables them to compete effectively with their peers around the world, we are shortchanging their capacity to develop themselves, human development, and to develop the society, because it's proportional. The value you place on human development plays a role in the value those human beings bring to the community. And community development cannot fly unless there's also individual development. And so this is something the country has to deliberately reflect on. And
Yeah.
I think maybe that's part of the challenge in governance, that there's not enough reflection. And this is not a critique of the government. I'm just an academic. This is what should happen: some level of institutional dialogue and reflection within the system to say, where are we on this journey of nationhood? And how might we be able to move forward, cross this bridge of trauma and violence that was created over time, and become a better society where everybody's life is valued, where social amenities are not only available to the rich, but also to as many people as possible within the available resources, and also whereby the resources of the state are not misused for private interest, but also for a public good. And redefining government, redefining governance as serving the public good as opposed to serving private interest or tribal leaders or war leaders, or whatever you might call them
Yeah.
within the society. And that's
Okay.
critical.
Good.
Unless this is done, the journey of a cohesive, reformed, repaired, restored, and developing or rapidly developing Liberia might be, a suspended journey. And I don't think that's what the great people of Liberia want. They want a society, a country they can always be very proud of, considering their original position within the African continent. Liberia and Ethiopia is often looked upon when we want to talk about the history of international law, the history of liberation, the history of independence in Africa. So it's critical to pursue
Yeah.
those transformative goals, but it has to begin with commitment to
Yeah.
have a reflection, because
Thank you.
an unexamined society is not worth having.
Great. Jackie Sayase, that is what we have been calling for, a war memorial, lest we forget, a warning for the future. To that, we have Mombedo Nindin Joa in Liberia. Say, Jackie, the I think UNHCR has built memorials in certain places. However, the residents have said this holds no importance for them. And I put that up because it speaks to the continual dialogue and the education that you talk about.
Exactly. Uh, Memorials are not something imported from abroad and placed somewhere. It has to be the people deciding that we have to create a memorial, whether at a community level or at a national level. Sometimes people create a national memorial day.
Oh, excuse me, doctor. This is INCHR. It's not UNCHR. So I don't exactly know what INCHR
That's,
is.
that's the Independent National Commission on Human Rights.
Oh, okay.
Okay. The Liberian Institution for Human Rights. That's that. So how much of those memorials were as a result of a community deliberation or dialogue? Or is it that some technocrats sat down in the city and
In Mama Point or somewhere in Duko.
designed a proposal for a memorial? For a memorial to speak to the heart of the people, it must also flow from the heart of the people. Because memory is like a basket. Everybody carries his own. But to make it a collective memory, it has to be an articulation of some of those individual memories, which now forms collective community memory. And that's part of what you do when you want to provide true healing true reconciliation within the community. Otherwise, the people will not identify with it, and you will have just wasted state money, state funds, building memorials that do not speak to the heart of the people, building memorials that may unwittingly misrepresent what happened and tell a false story. And that's why you need expertise, you need education, so that you can dig out from the society what matters to them, what memories they intend to share for the future generation, so that this kind of violence can be avoided. Because not to tell the story, not to memorialize, is to have open wounds all over the place, to have open holes, open grounds all over the place, and cover them with plantain leaves so that little children of tomorrow might fall into those ditches because you just covered them with plantain leaves. But to create a memory that is collective, acceptable to the people, means you have deeply made efforts to close the holes so that the future generation will be properly guided as to the dangers of war,
Yes.
as to the dangers of identifying some members of the community as not worthy to be members of that community, as to the dangers of discrimination, as to the dangers of mismanaging diversity in a diverse country like Liberia, as to the dangers of misusing natural resources like rubber, diamond, or whatever you have, as to the dangers of also encouraging violence in other countries, because what you encourage in other places can cross the borders and affect the way you also live your own life. So, in one way or the other, there are so many lessons that can be articulated and put together in form of a memorialization, an institution that continues to track the memory, continues to remind the people, continues to educate the people now and in the future as to the cost of war and why we should avoid it, and why peace and development are critical to the emergence of a new, dynamic, and developed Liberia. In line with what has happened in other places like in Rwanda, in South Africa, in countries in Eastern Europe, or even Germany, who have emerged from war situations and even became more powerful, more responsible, more recognized, more, you know, more participatory in the international community. So that's the kind of dream I have for a new Liberia. But it is for the Liberian people, the great people of Liberia, to have these deliberations in their hearts, in their communities, and then come forward with a strategic plan as to how to implement some of the recommendations arising from the Truth Commission, and how to make for restoration,
Yeah.
repair, and development in their society.
And that's one reason we still have Ahmed on the line. And Ahmed, I'm going to bring you in just a few minutes for your closing comments since you were still here. But I just want to remind you of what we have in store for the week. This is focused on Liberia, where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. Today, our guest, Dr. Cosmas Emeziem, he in Liberia, what we say, he eat transitional justice like Kanya. And that's why we brought him here to speak to us on this very important topic. And we don't stop in here. Tomorrow we have VP Joe Boakai, the Unity Party, and the road to 2023. Our guest is the chairman of the UP-USA, Mr. Kappa Doyen. He's going to be sitting in with the political bulldog here at Focus on Liberia, my man, as soon as here on the Hour of Politics. On Wednesday night, we have the former Deputy Minister of Sports, Honorable Mambu Richards. He's going to be our guest to have a retrospective analysis of sports in Liberia. We're going to be talking about football, basketball, boxing, tennis, kickball, track and field. And he's not going to do that alone. We have the legend, the original number 14, Benedict Yanko Wisa, aka Mama Musa, who is a former Lone Star striker, and also Mr. Charles Wadsworth, a former national basketball player, will be here. Then guess what? On Thursday, it's time for our Tough Talking Thursday. The primary in the CPP is shaping up, so we're going to have Alexander Cummings versus Joe Boakai in a potential CPP primary. Who wins and why? Who is the better CPP option to quote-unquote take down President Weah. You don't want to miss it. My guest, the FOL Chief Analyst Raymond Cooney, FOL Democracy Analyst Joe Kai, a community leader Prince Williams, and also political commentator and co-host of FOL On Point, Mr. George Kanetule. Again, Dr. Emeziem, I want to say thank you so much for being here tonight. Let me bring in my friend Ahmed. Ahmed is a policy guru. Ahmed, you have some closing comments since you're still here before you leave. I want to hear something from you.
Yes, sir. Yes, thank you. I just want to thank again Dr. Cosmas and Emesian for your brilliant presentation.
Thank you.
I wanted to focus on Liberia instead of to mimic the name of your platform here. To specifically look at this thing about stigmatization of on the part of any government. Again, it's not it's a specific administration, current administration, but I think even the previous administration sort of dragged its feet around promoting transitional justice recommendations that emerged from the Truth and Reconciliation process in Liberia. Specifically, this whole thing about war crimes and economic crimes, as I mentioned earlier. I think it shouldn't be stigmatized. We shouldn't sweep everything under the carpet, so to speak, because horrific things happened in our country as egregious human rights violations occurred, war crimes, crimes against humanity occurred, and we continue to be a country that hasn't really come to terms with the root causes of our conflict and hasn't really, again, like the good doctor on the show has said, come together to say what is the roadmap moving forward in terms of reconciliation, in terms of accountability, because transitional justice has various principles, right? That you hold people accountable so that it serves as deterrent, so that it punishes people, and you also want to ensure that it never happens again, right? So that it doesn't occur again. So there are all kinds of things that we need to be focusing on to be able to move our country forward, to help our people heal and reconcile that ought to be done. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity to pour in and make a few comments and commensurate with your guest. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Emeziem, before I close, before I go to you for your final comments, when I said George Benedict Mama Musa, we said the original number 14, Riverside Pro is saying George Weah is the original number 14. As far as I know, Judge Mama Musa, that's Benedict Wisa, wore the number 14 before our current president, Judge Weah. So that's just our Liberian football history. Let me go to you, Dr. Emeziem. Thank you again so much for coming and honoring our invitation. We want to get your final comment. Again, don't forget to let us know. So what do we do now? Where do we go from here as Liberians? Please wrap that up in your final comments.
Thank you, Dennis. Liberia is a great country with a lot of history, which is very significant for us Africans. And we are looking to see that you are able to have a dialogue with yourself and come to terms with what happened and achieve the goal of reconciliation, restoration, repair, and development. Because development is also a way to freedom and peace. Because repair is essential for healing. And because restoration is the only pathway to the future. And these together form what we talk about when we say transitional justice. And one key element which we should not forget is to avoid repetition. Non-repetition is a key aspect of transitional justice because if we fall back to what happened, all the efforts would have been in vain. And that's not anybody's wish for the great people of Liberia. So decide on what you want, set up a strategic team, set up a strategic process, a strategic procedure with which you can implement that, and then go forward with the political will and courage that you can find lasting justice restoration, peace, and development. Without this, you will be playing a second fiddle, and that's not what you should be doing, considering where Liberia is coming from, historically speaking, and considering what contributions you can make to the African continent and to the great people of Liberia, the ordinary people of Liberia who are waiting for transformation. Transformation without justice and peace does not mean anything, it's not meaningful. So the pathway is to decide, what do we want? And the only way to decide that is to have a dialogue with the public and educate the public. How do we want to achieve these goals? And that is also part of the engagement. And then when and how do we implement the full transitional justice measures? It's been my pleasure to participate in this big dialogue, deliberating and articulating ideas as to how we can create a better Liberian society. I feel humbled to have been asked to participate. Thank you.
I am very humbled that you could honor our invitation to be here. And as your schedule may permit, we want to do this again because we really enjoy. My audience also enjoy the discussion, and we look forward to more engagement. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I want to thank our viewers for being here. We want to thank in a special way all those who commented, call in, and part of this discussion. We will always want to remind our Liberian fellow Liberians that we are all Liberians. There are people who are now calling for the TRC, some for war crimes court. Some say, oh no, you didn't call for war crimes court when President Salih was in power. Why are you calling now? No matter which side of the argument you stand on, we are all Liberians. And we remember that there can be no true peace, no genuine development without justice. And we must do whatever it takes for us to make our country that glorious land of liberty. And that's why we always end with the song, We Are All Liberians. And that song will be closing us tonight. Good night and God bless you.
We are Liberia. Liberia is our home. Liberia people. Liberia.